Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and Dennis Hall, LLG's Bulletin Editor.
Hi, everyone.
Now then, Dennis, we've got a general election on our hands. And for those wondering about the period of heightened sensitivity for local government, look no further than paragraph 34 of the recommended Code of Practice for Local Authority Publicity. Or if you'd prefer, listen to our vlog to learn more. Now to other news, Dennis. What have we got?
Well, yes, thanks, Helen. It's the anniversary of the Care Act 2014. Councils are doing all they can to ensure they meet their duties under the Care Act, including cutting spending on other neighbourhood services. But many still fear they will not be able to do so over the coming years. Now, this is an area any new government cannot possibly ignore and is a key ask of the LGA. Let's look at this further. Governments should stop treating adult social care as a political football and make a substantial long-term investment in it to mark the 10th anniversary of the Care Act 2014. That call had come from the Local Government Association, which said that a decade on, the sector was at best kept afloat, and periods of austerity, early recovery reliant on local taxation, and continued recovery driven by one-off injections of resources have characterised the adult social care funding picture, hampering full delivery of the legislation. Among LGA members, only some 2/3 are confident of being able to meet all their legal duties under the Care Act by 2025 to 26, despite 80% of councils cutting other services to shore up just social care. It said in a report on the Act's record that addressing funding pressures was essential, and alongside this, there should be a bold and ambitious action on prevention across health and social care, which, if done effectively, had the potential to improve outcomes and reduce costs. And it recalled that the Care Act originated in the Law Commission's review of adult social care law and the Dilnut Commission's inquiry into how care should be financed. Further reports had followed, but the sector had continued to rely on one-off injections of resources rather than planned long-term funding programs. Funding is cited time and again as one of the central reasons why the Care Act aims have not been delivered in full, the LGA said. Public understanding of social care was limited, and the usual focus of governments on the NHS when discussing health and social care meant a quick descent into trading blows when adult social care debates enter the national political realm. Legislative change was not needed, but to really deliver the full spirit of the Act, significant additional and sustainable funding is an inevitable requirement, the LGA said. An immediate injection of funding could be a down payment on a future multi-year settlement for adult social care and a real signal of intent by an incoming government that care and support is central to our national infrastructure. Now, ahead of a general election, the LGA said all parties should end the politicisation of adult social care and work on a cross-party basis to secure the services in the future. David Fothergill, social care spokesman for the LGA, said, "A decade on, people are still facing long waiting times for assessments and support and not getting the full care and support that they need." And he added, "Adult social care needs urgent attention, and this must be top of the in tray for any government coming forward."
Well, now I really wanted to talk about the testimony of Paula Venables at the Post Office inquiry last week, Dennis, but I'm going to leave that as we are going to be producing a focused roundtable discussion with several stakeholders taking part. I'm just going to say, however, that I was left at times utterly speechless at what we learnt, or rather what we heard, and I've normally got a lot to say, so that's saying something. Moving along, this is the news that farmers will be able to convert their unused buildings into new homes and shops thanks to new planning laws coming into effect. The major changes give farmers across England greater freedoms to diversify and grow their business without having to spend time and money submitting a planning application. They will be able to convert agricultural buildings and land into new lucrative business opportunities such as outdoor sports facilities, larger farm shops and farm training centres, as well as housing. These new powers come in a week after the Farm to Fork summit, where the Prime Minister reiterated the government's commitment to backing farmers who keep the country fed. And the changes coming into force will give them new freedoms to diversify if they choose to. Now, the Minister for Housing, Planning and Building Safety, Lee Rowley, said, quote, "Farmers are the lifeblood of communities, and these changes give them the freedom to grow their businesses and plan for their futures." He went on, "This is all part of our long-term plan for housing to deliver more homes for rural communities and reform the planning system, removing unnecessary barriers to development." Now, it's unclear what impact this might have brought for Jeremy Clarkson's Diddley Squat Farm restaurant, Dennis. But the report at the time, in respect of that, actually, the inspector's report to the planning appeal, it was written by Inspector R.J. Perrins, outlined how the council objected to Clarkson changing the land to a mixed agricultural and leisure attraction use, comprising cafe, restaurant, gift farm shop, parking and lavatory facilities. However, Perrins also disagreed with the council's comparison of the farm to a leisure centre attraction, as, quote, "it does not ask for an entrance fee and was not comparable to, say, a wildlife park or miniature railway." And the report also describes the farm as a victim of its own success. But it'll be interesting to see if it opens the door further to Clarkson, actually, in respect of that rather novel business approach that he has. Now, sticking with planning, what news of a consultation proposing to speed up the planning service, Dennis?
Well, yes. Well, what's most important when dealing with planning decisions? That's the central question. The speed or quality of decision making? Don't some decisions take more time and need more care than others? Now, Duluth held a consultation from the 6th of March to the 1st of May this year on the proposed introduction of an accelerated planning service, and at the same time introduce restrictions on extensions of time. Is this what's really needed? Now, both political parties have different priorities for planning, as we'll see during the forthcoming campaign, but the quality of decision making should be a constant requirement. Let's look further at this. Fundamentally, the government, indeed any government, must ask themselves what they value more from the planning system in order to deliver growth and sustainable places. Is it the speed of an application decision, or the quality of the outcome or the development for local communities? Local authorities are not the barrier to development, with just under 9 in 10 planning applications being granted permission. Whilst the government lament the use of extension of time agreements and wish to restrict their use and remove these from the performance framework for planning and development, the fundamental matter is that their increased use disguises an outdated performance regime and statutory timescales which have not changed to reflect the increased complexity of planning applications. Now, the LGA have urged the government to undertake a holistic review of statutory timescales for application determinations, which have not changed since their introduction in the 1990s, despite the vast increase in factors that our communities and government want planners to take into consideration. The LGA challenged the government's assessment of how realistic a 10-week period of determination for the accelerated planning service is for applications which take an average 28 weeks. Local authorities have raised concerns with the LGA that a 10-week period is not manageable, in particular if the initial application itself is incomplete. Local authority planning departments are also facing incredibly challenging resourcing, capacity and skills shortages at this time, with nearly 60% of councils experiencing difficulties recruiting planners. And over 1/3 of LGA members face challenges in retention of planning staff or preventing the brain drain to the private sector. The LGA have urgently called on the government to allow local authorities, who are best placed, to calculate and set the appropriate fee for the proposed accelerated service, as well as all other planning application types. They simply do not agree with the proposed new approach to performance management of planning authorities, nor the proposals to restrict extension of time agreements. Helen.
Interesting, Dennis. Now, in a change of topic, Fly tipping is a costly blight on the landscape for local authorities to deal with, and it's often difficult to find the culprits and bring them before the courts. In the battle against fly tipping, the government have announced that 26 councils will receive a share of an almost 1 million boost to step up their battle against fly tipping and better protect communities. The grants will support various schemes to take the fight to waste criminals, such as an increase in CCTV cameras in hotspot areas, AI-assisted camera technology, and campaigns to raise households' awareness of their duty to only use licensed waste companies when picking up rubbish. Now, the initial round will see 26 local authorities across England benefit from the grants of up to 50,000, and some of these authorities include the London Borough of Hounslow, the City of Wolverhampton Council, and Cheshire East Council. Now, the London Borough of Hounslow will be installing CCTV cameras with ANPR readers to better identify offenders, whilst directly informing residents about correct waste disposal methods. The City of Wolverhampton will introduce further CCTV signage and AI-enabled smart cameras, with images captured on the CCTV shared via the council's Shop a Tipper campaign for residents to come forward to identify criminals, and this will increase the probability of identifying offenders for prosecutions and reinforce that fly tipping is not the easy option. That's the aim. And Cheshire East Council will be providing handheld devices to street enforcement officers to increase the time officers can spend on the streets and improve engagement with the community. Now, Recycling Minister Robbie Moore said, quote, fly tipping is a brazen attack on communities, nature and our environment. It can create danger for wildlife as well as people, and I am determined the harm done by cynical criminals doesn't go unpunished. Now, previously, DEFRA funding helped Hyndburn Borough Council install fencing and gates to prevent access to fly tipping hotspots. And believe it or not, this saw fly tipping decrease by 100%, they said, in these areas in the following 3 months. So that's 3 months without any fly tipping. And the council said it saved approximately £4,150 in waste removal and cleanup costs over that period. So that's a great result for them. Now, under the government's anti-social behaviour action plan, the government increased the upper limit of on-the-spot fines for fly tipping to 1,000, and for littering it went up to 500, and that was back in July 2023. And it also laid regulations to ring-fence the money raised by councils from litter and fly tipping penalties for enforcement and cleanup activity, and that came into force on the 1st of April this year, so that money is now capable of being ring-fenced for that purpose. Now then, Dennis, the frantic Friday approach to deadlines is something you've been looking at, I understand.
Indeed I have. You know, old habits really do die hard, especially for litigation lawyers who say that frequently when a deadline is set as a Friday, the main deadline for responses in legal actions and so forth, that as a result, thus does the claim arise that their weekends are regularly ruined. Ditch Friday deadlines and reduce stress all round, say litigators now. Is this a serious request? And what would the effect be? Let's take a closer look at all of this.
Litigators should set Wednesday deadlines for documents to be exchanged and save everyone the stress of the so-called Friday night drop. Now, this was one interesting suggestion that came from discussions about new guidance issued on better ways to litigate drawn up by the Mindful Business Charter. And this new commitment, signed up by dozens of city firms, aims to reduce unnecessary workplace stress and improve well-being across the legal profession. James Boone, a partner and well-being champion from national firm Bristow's, said anxiety around late-night deadlines on a Friday can ruin weekends if something goes wrong and the cut-off point cannot be met. But the adjustment of moving a deadline to a Wednesday, he said, would eliminate much of this stress and make for a better work environment for everybody. Simple but potentially game-changing difference to the way we conduct ourselves, said Boone, who was speaking in a webinar hosted by the MBC last week. We shouldn't be creatures of habit. And Luke Maunder, Associate Director of national firm Osborne Clark, added, it is all too common, and I have done it,
to think of a deadline and think that it should be on a Friday, because that is what it always has been. And how many people love a Friday deadline? Maybe it's worth working with the other side to ask who doesn't. Katie Byrne, a commercial litigation partner at national firm Irwin Mitchell, said a mindful approach to litigation was not designed to reduce the nature of the work, but more to reduce unnecessary stress, which will ultimately make everyone a better lawyer. Litigation and disputes are necessarily adversarial, which puts us in a difficult position as a lawyer, said Byrne. We need to recognize we're all human, treat each other with humanity and respect, and understand we all have personal lives. Byrne went on and said it was possible to differentiate duties to the client from how interactions are handled between lawyers, including not reacting when the other side has acted provocatively. Aggressive strategy doesn't necessarily mean aggressive conduct, she added. We've all received the letter that has angered us and wanted to respond straight away, and often that response is not the right one. Interesting.
Well, a bit of breathing space can prevent escalation and take the emotion out of things. Now, returning to planning, it's a bit of a theme this week. A new scheme which requires developers to boost nature has been launched without having all the elements in place to deliver it, the National Audit Office has warned. Now, the biodiversity net gain, and that's something Dennis and I have both spoken about on the podcast previously, it requires, as I'm sure you're aware, developers to finance the creation of habitat that not only replaces what has been lost to development, but boosts habitat overall by 10%. Now, under the programme, which I should say only applies to England, the gains for nature should ideally be on site. So in its report entitled Implementing Statutory Biodiversity Net Gain, the National Audit Office raised questions about how well DEFRA could monitor the policy's performance and whether local authorities will be able to discharge their new duties. Now, some of the highlights of concern included in that report by the National Audit Office are as follows: that local authorities have a legal duty to approve developers' plans where they meet the BNG requirement, oversee on-site and most off-site gains, monitor compliance, and take enforcement action as appropriate. Now, whilst DEFRA's calculation of the new burden to local authorities included an amount equivalent to a 0.2 full-time post, that's quite small in itself, in order to acknowledge monitoring and enforcement requirements, local authorities have not received additional funding specifically to monitor or enforce on-site gains. Now, when you look at academic research, which was back in 2023 on voluntary BNG, that was before it became statutorily obligated, that found a governance gap for on-site gains that risked them being unenforceable. Further, DEFRA is relying on a market for biodiversity units emerging, but does not know how rapidly this market can scale up or whether the market can satisfy demand. DEFRA does not yet have a mechanism to spend income from statutory credit sales to enhance biodiversity, and DEFRA does not yet have access to all the information that it will need to understand how well statutory BNG is working. Specifically in respect of DEFRA, the National Audit Office found that it has a long way to go before it can be confident that damage to biodiversity through development will not be understated, and that the benefits of biodiversity enhancements will actually be delivered. For its market-led approach to work, and recommended that DEFRA should ensure local authorities have sufficient and timely funding certainty actually to allow longer term planning, which makes sense. And on that note, you can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 18, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too.
Have a good week.